to the Nantucket Civic League's Meet the Articles program. I'm Alan Reinhardt. I'm the president of the Nantucket Civic League, and we are the umbrella organization for the 23 different area associations from Wauwinet to Madaket and pretty much everything in between. Part of our mission is to promote informed citizen participation in local government. Holding events, programs such as this, such as Meet the Articles, Meet the Candidates that we do before the election in April, is one way that we accomplish this or try to accomplish this. We also hold forums throughout the year focusing on different issues, concerns, and topics that impact the quality of life on Nantucket. If you're a member, by the way, of your local area association, you are also a member of the Civic League. And if you're not a member, we encourage you to join your local area association and have a say in how the community works. Now, the purpose of this morning's program is to inform voters about the issues to come before us at our special town meeting on Monday, 6 p.m. On Nantucket, we have the open town meeting form of government. The town meeting serves as the legislative body for our local government, and that's an important distinction, a thing a lot of people don't realize. As a result, as the legislative body, the special town meeting has to approve all the appropriations and the bylaws and other regulations that govern activity in the town. Today's purpose is to explain those articles that will be coming up on Monday evening so voters can make informed decisions. We'll hear from proponents of the warrant articles to be voted and from the chairman of the Finance Committee as far as the Finance Committee's recommendations on these articles. And let's see. Basically, it's very important for people to attend. We need to have at least 425 people present in order to have a quorum to approve the appropriation articles. And that's a very important thing. Without a quorum, we have to do it all over again. Or, well, anyway, let's be sure we have attendance there. Dr. Peter Morrison, on my right, will be the moderator for today's program. Peter is a member of the Civic League's executive board. It's the executive board that pulls these programs together. And Peter is also has been a member of many different committees in town over the years. So without further ado, Peter.
Thank you, Alan. On behalf of the Civic League, I want to reiterate the welcome to you and just give you a brief overview of our format, which is going to offer the proponent of each citizen article a chance to explain its intended purpose and how it will operate. And we've also invited a speaker with an alternative viewpoint to offer their opinions. For Articles 1 through 4, which we're going to take up first, the appropriations amendment articles, and for each of the citizens articles, numbers 5 through 11, I've allocated 4 minutes to each of 2 presentations, 2 speakers. And for the other articles, which are 6 through 10 on zoning and 12 through 21 on real estate, you'll have a single 4-minute presentation. Following each presentation, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. And the way that's going to work is you have an opportunity now to submit written questions if you know what it is you want to ask. And once the given article comes up and has been discussed, I'll take all the written questions first for speakers to address briefly. And thereafter, as time permits, we'll open the floor to live questions. And I've allocated 8 minutes for questions in total per segment, both the written and the live ones. So if you know your question for our speaker, now's the time to write it down along with the article number, submit it promptly to our friendly volunteers, and then, like with Southwest Airlines, you'll be in boarding section A when we take them. We're going to start with Articles 1 through 4, and we are going to have our town manager, Libby Gibson, if she would come up, and Chair of the Finance Committee, Matt Mulcahy. And I'm going to ask Libby to spend about 4 minutes just walking through these 4 appropriation amendment articles. Libby?
Welcome. Thanks for having us.
I actually thought Matt was going to start.
I'll start.
You can start? Okay. We'll start with Matt, Chair of the Finance Committee.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us to be present here. As a representative of the Finance Committee, we certainly appreciate your involvement and look forward to continued involvement. And please feel free to ask questions now or whenever, because we do serve you. And hopefully after today, we have a little better understanding of our committee's views on these warrant articles. I do see that a handout was given as a guide for these articles, and my comments pretty much are an abridged version of that. And I'd like to start with Article 1. Back in the spring, the fiscal year 2013 budget was approved, and at that time, there was a strong possibility that due to uncertainty of certain airport expenses, that a special town meeting was necessary. And the reason why is because due to state regulations, revenues for the coming year can only be budgeted at a level based on the previous year's actual revenues for enterprise funds. This year, this regulation has resulted in expenses being higher than revenues for some of the enterprise departments. A prime example involves our airport. Our airport is in the business of supplying fuel for planes, among other revenue producers. Because revenues and expenses for fuel can fluctuate at certain times of the year, following this regulation can be challenges for budgeting purposes. In addition, debt service costs were determined after our last town meeting for existing approved projects that were not reflected in the budget that you voted on. There is legislation that has been proposed to lower the fuel volatility to avoid this problem in the future. It's just going to take a little time. What you're asked to vote on is directly related to these charges. The airport shortfall will be covered from the general fund and will be expected to be repaid to the town over the next few years. And at this time, there is good communication between the town and the airport, and I'm confident that the ship will be righted and things will get back to normal so that we won't be coming back and asking you for continued subsidies. Except we might have one more time, we might. So there might be one more. The sewer department has a shortfall of $500,000 due to revenues budgeted less than expenses. This will result in a reduction in expenses to balance this department's budget right now. It is expected that retained earnings will be certified in the spring and will be used to increase the expenses back. So you'll be asked in the spring to use some of the retained earnings for the sewer to pay for these expenses. The Wannacomet Water Company took in $269,000 of revenue, less revenue than expected. Expenses will also be decreased accordingly. Expected retained earnings, when certified, will be used to adjust this at the spring town meeting. And as for other departments, Wisconsin Water, Solid Waste, and Our Island Home, revenues came in higher, and these will be added to the budgets accordingly. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Libby, on that?
I think you did a fine job on that.
Thank you. I better.
Okay, we are somewhat ahead of schedule, and since I have no written questions at this point, I will throw the floor open to questions from the audience. Raise your hand. Yes, sir.
Yes, Matt.
Please identify yourself if you would also.
I'm Randy Ringer. Matt, you indicated that revenue will be generated in future years from the airport to be able to repay the funds that are given out. What
That's correct.
specifically is it that you generate that additional revenue going forward, and how long would it take?
Well, I don't know if there are some additional revenues that will be generated, and the airport manager is looking into these different ways of raising revenue. I think more specifically for right now, is that due to, for lack of a better term, the misaccounting of the past few years, is that we didn't have a clear picture of the financials at the airport. So right now, things are being sorted out into their proper accounts, and as they settle out, the belief is that the airport won't require a subsidy based on where we are right now.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Please. Yeah.
Additionally, I think the airport is looking at some new revenue opportunities. They're looking at something called a passenger facility charge. That will generate some revenue that is to be dedicated to specific purposes, probably debt service, I believe, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong. Also, the airport has spent quite a lot of time examining its expenses, and there were several one-time expenses in fiscal 12 that will not be going forward into future years, so that helps also, and they've pared down some personnel expenses and some operating expenses, so it's kind of a combination of things, I think, that going forward will help the budget.
Do you have a horizon in terms of how long the payback would take?
That is being negotiated right now, and Libby, you can jump in. Hopefully within, at the most, 5 years.
Yeah, and that may be even a bit long.
Long, might
But
be.
we're going to have a plan ready to go for implementation in 14, maybe 13, but 14
Certainly
for
14,
sure.
right. Okay.
Other questions from the audience?
Please use the microphone. So we can-
Yeah, actually, would you come up to the microphone and identify yourself?
My name is Andy Schwartz. I'm hearing a bunch of numbers and a bunch of rationale and a bunch of reasons. My background is engineering, not legal or financial, so this makes very little sense to me. It sounds like the continuation of a gigantic screw-up, if not malfeasance. You're asking the general public to put their hands deeper in their pockets and hope that it gets paid back someday. Is that correct? Do I have that right?
No.
Okay,
First
so
of all, I think malfeasance is a little bit strong. There was
Yeah.
a forensic audit conducted, and which is made public. Certainly, there are problems that were there. I'm sitting before you telling you, yes, that problems did exist, sloppy accounting, sloppy postings. Various individuals and departments were responsible, including me. Now, you mentioned about hope. None of this is hope. Airport administration, town administration, finance professionals have spent a lot of time communicating with each other to get these problems fixed. Unfortunately, it took 6 years at least for these problems to build on up. It's taking a while to get them straightened out. I wish I could give you a more specific explanation. My introduction is more as an overview, but I'm sitting here with the assurances that the accounting is getting better, and I expect one more time in the spring for a subsidy, and then after that, hopefully things will be better. Hopefully, no, excuse me, I'm taking that back. Things will be better. Libby, I don't know if you want to add anything.
all right, that being said, again, to clarify this in simple terms,
All right.
our taxes are going up to pay for this.
I would say no.
Right, I
Your
would say
taxes
no.
are not going up to pay for this. The funding from the general fund is basically the result, is basically coming from a reduction in a subsidy to a different enterprise fund, the Island Home. Taxes are not going up because of this,
So we're taking money from the island home to give to the airport.
in a way. The Island Home's expenses and revenue for fiscal 13 were based on about a year ago, when we were projecting the fiscal 13 budget, we projected a particular amount of a subsidy for our island home. They received a one-time, maybe ongoing, but at least one-time revenue jump in fiscal 12 that allows us to reduce the subsidy for fiscal 13. So the money is available and will be used temporarily for the airport.
Okay, so the island home got more money than they needed,
Right.
and we're taking that to subsidize the airport for a while.
For a while, we will be paid back.
Okay, so then the dust settles
That's the
over the next
intent.
few years or what have you, and
Yes.
then things start to get run intelligently and correctly.
Yes, which I would say firmly they are being now.
Okay. A comment. And this has been building for a while, at least in my mind. Every year, we get this warrant, you know, I think that's what it's called, for the
Yes.
town meeting? All right. I don't think any human being could possibly read that, but okay. And where I have a real issue is that the length of the descriptions of all this and the language that they're written in has a nasty tendency to be legalese. And, you know, I graduated with honors from an Ivy League university, and I have a Master of Science degree from the California Institute of Technology, and I can barely understand a word of this. I don't understand why these documents can't be presented to the general public in plain, simple, short, concise English, so that all the people in the township can read them and make an intelligent, informed decision. Because 75% of the time, unless you're a trained accountant, or even worse, a trained lawyer, you can't understand this. I don't think that I'm not saying that there's an intent to defraud, and that's not the right word either. I'm not saying there's an intent to be evasive, but I strongly suspect that a lot more people would come to town meetings, and a lot more people would participate in this wonderful process that we have of governing our island if they could understand what's going on here.
I'm going to intervene at this point because I think you have posed a global question to which there is no simple answer that can be provided by either our Finance Committee chair or our town manager.
If the people who write this can't state what they want to state in plain, simple English, then they're incompetent and they shouldn't be allowed to write it.
Well, one of the purposes of our meeting today is to bridge that information gap. And I would like to move on to any other questions. We have about 2 more minutes. Please raise your hand and come up to the microphone. Thank you. Actually, I think she was... No, we need to have you at the microphone because the TV audience won't be able to hear a word you say. Yeah.
You mentioned, Libby, a passenger service charge. You mentioned a
identify
passenger
yourself?
service charge. Natalie Jacobson.
Okay.
What is that, and how much is that?
It's a passenger facility charge. I would need to let Tom explain it. It is a surcharge on plane tickets, the revenue from which goes to dedicated purposes. I'm not sure what the percentage is. I think they're looking at that
It
now.
can range anywhere from $1 per passenger up to $4.50.
And how will that be decided, and who decides it?
It will be based on a formula dependent upon what the payback is that we're looking for and what we believe the market will bear. So it'll be most likely put towards the debt service, as Libby said earlier.
Okay.
Matt?
Oh, thank you.
One comment on this point.
Just before you go on, sir, I'm sorry. Back to Mr. Schwartz's point, I am very sympathetic because I am not a legally or financially trained individual either. But I would like to point out that the articles as written are written for legal approval with the state for a consistency. And yes, they are hard to understand. But I would also like to point out that this guide is a step to try to simplify the issues at hand. We also try to, even more, or I try to even make things more basic than that to explain to you. So I want to apologize for the complicated language, but it is the world that we live in. And That being said, I would make more effort in the future to try to make things more in common language so that it is easier to understand. Thanks. Okay, sir, thank you.
Yes, Randy Renger. You've mentioned about a spring subsidy,
Yes,
about the,
possible.
probably the possibility of that. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what that might be?
Well, it's difficult right now. From my standpoint, it would be for the volatility in fuel costs, again, the potential there that being that we have budgeted for last year's revenue, if fuel sales go up, we cannot use that increased revenue that comes in to pay the bills. And so we would need to come back to ask you for a subsidy to do that. That's one example. Another example is a potential for, there's been a lot of debt service recently at the airport, and hopefully we have that all budgeted now, but the potential exists that we could come back, that the numbers now could change, and that we'd have to come back and ask again for approval to increase that just to reflect those changes. And again, and the reason I say that is that there was a perception from last town meeting that everything was fixed. And I just want to be clear is that we're getting better, but we might have to come back one more time for this. That was my intention. Libby, I don't know if you want to add to that?
Nope.
Okay. I'm sorry, I want to ask that again.
Other questions? We got another 2 minutes or so. If not, thank you for audience participation. We're going to move on now to Citizens Article 5, which is the appropriation for a community-scale wind turbine at the landfill. And I'd like to ask Barbara Gukin to step up and be our first presenter.
Do we go?
Do we leave? Pardon? No.
I got
Matt
stay.
stays. Right.
Don't stop.
I'm going to move.
Welcome, Barbara.
Morning, Barbara.
You have 4 minutes to give us an overview.
Okay, well, I don't know, do people have a copy of the Warren article?
They should. Yes,
Okay.
they were available.
So I guess what I will do is just give a general overview of what it is and why I'm proposing it, and also read the positive motion that I've submitted for consideration. I'll start with the positive motion. Can everyone hear me? A little louder. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. The positive motion reads, move that $620,000 be appropriated for professional services for design, permitting, construction, supervision, engineering services, and other related professional services, and for construction of a community-scale wind turbine similar in size and specifications to the Nantucket High School wind turbine, to be located at the Mattocket landfill, with all such expenditures to be made by the town manager with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, that to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow $620,000 under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, and any other enabling authority, provided, however, that the amount authorized to be borrowed shall be reduced by the amount of any gifts or grants received by the town for this project, and provided further that this vote shall not take effect until the town votes by a ballot on a referendum question to exempt from the limitations on total taxes imposed by Proposition 2.5, so-called, amounts required to pay the principal of the interest and the borrowing authorized by this vote pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 21CK. So that's a whole bunch of legal talk that I don't know how to write that, so I had some help with that from town council. But basically, all that does is puts a dollar amount on what I'm proposing, which is a wind turbine at the high school. I mean, a wind turbine at the landfill, just like the wind turbine that exists at the high school. It doesn't name the brand or the model number because that would exempt bidders from bidding on the project. The dollar amount in here is the highest dollar amount that would be sought. If bidders come in and bid higher than that, the town just wouldn't do it. It's outside the scope of what would be authorized. I chose the highest amount so that other bidders who fall under it, of course, would qualify. And I did talk to some vendors and asked what would it cost and what did the high school turbine cost. And actually, I was on that project committee, so I was very involved in that. And I know the grants that were sought and received, and I know that the permits that were necessary, and they would be very, very similar. The big difference is that a lot of these permits exist because in the past few years, the town had been working on a much larger wind turbine project at that same location at the landfill. Many of those permits and studies that were done are transferable to this smaller wind turbine project. There are also other grants, so this positive motion talks about that this cost could be reduced by such things as grants and gifts. There are other grants that are available. Our town has already spent $172,000 in studies for the larger wind turbine that was proposed that now is off the table. So, we can take advantage of what's already been spent, use some of those studies that do apply, and then seek grants for whatever we might still need. I think the only thing we would need at this point, which would fall under the developer, would be design engineering studies, because it would be a different turbine. The other things that exist are studies that were done for the high school wind turbine, which also can apply to this, which are the light, shadow, flicker studies, the noise studies. That's all transferable to this. The big difference in why I think this is a good project is that the wind speed at the landfill is far superior than at the high school. So we already know how this wind turbine exists and how it fits into our community. I believe it's been very benign. There might be a few people who disagree, but overall it's performed very well. It's been down a couple of times for scheduled maintenance. I think one time for unscheduled maintenance.
Sacred bell.
Okay, I'm cut off, so
You're
I
not
guess.
cut off, you can finish your sentence.
Oh, okay.
Finish your thought.
But it has been running steadily. It is very quiet as compared to most wind turbines, and that's why I want to propose the exact same one.
Thank you, Barbara, and I'm going to ask Matt to present for 4 minutes his perspective.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Barbara, for that. The Finance Committee voted not to adopt this article. The committee supports renewable energy and encouraged continued discussion for the future on this subject. The reasons the committee gave this a negative recommendation are as follows. Questions surrounding the amount of capital needed for the project. It was unclear to the committee what the appropriation would be. And you heard previously, just before, Ms. Gookin mentioned $620,000. We just weren't clear. Different numbers were presented as the warrant was discussed these past few months. The committee felt that this project, if supported, should be with the understanding that the return on the investment would be minimal. There is a question of the practicality of this type of turbine for this site and what net effect it would have on the town energy needs. The wind turbine project that was defeated this spring was much larger, and that was due to the needs of what it would be supplying power to, specifically the solid waste facility. The committee is concerned that this turbine, would not supply sufficient power where it would be intended. And then we had questions, what would the maintenance cost for this proposed turbine be? This was not made clear, that we felt. The committee feels that more data is necessary to determine what effects a turbine has on the area around it, including health issues, real estate assessments, and aesthetic issues for homeowners in the area. Thus, the Finance Committee feels that more study is needed, specifically looking at other options for renewable energy, the impact on the environment, and the long-term benefits and liabilities to the town before moving ahead with such an important initiative. Thank you.
Do I get a follow-up?
briefly.
Okay.
30 seconds.
I do want to present to the audience that I did present all of those numbers. The conflict comes in that an opposition group presented different numbers. So my numbers were there, and they're based on facts and experience. There are potential other renewable energy projects that I do believe we should move forward with. This is just one piece of the puzzle. And the big reason that I am promoting this and the other 3 articles that I'll be bringing in the spring annual town meeting are because I want us to avoid ever needing a 3rd cable to the mainland. Our cables are currently costing $125 million, and the next one will cost $50 to $60 million more paid by ratepayers. Thank you.
We have a number of questions, and I'm going to take them in order of receipt. The first question is, why should Nantucketers spend money on this proposal instead of on existing critical financial issues? And I think that's a question for you, Barbara.
Okay, well, this wouldn't take away from any of that because it would be an override. So it wouldn't take away from anything. And also, this proposal would save the town money. So we would ask for an override. The town would benefit by annual savings even from the first year. The 10-year loan could be paid off within 7 years, and then the savings would be dramatically increased for the next 20 years.
And there's a question for you, Matt, which is, what conditions, if any, do you envision that would allow you to, and I think by you it's meant the Finance Committee, to support a wind turbine at the landfill? There has been much discussion and scrutiny already.
That is a good question. Trying to answer that from a macro view, the Finance Committee really tries to limit its deliberations from the financial aspect, even though that's living in a vacuum and there are other issues involved. But I think the short answer is that I think that the Finance Committee would look much more favorable on any project that, with the potential of a return on investment, if the committee was comfortable with the data presented to move forward.
The next question is, I think, for you, Barbara. In developing your proposal in the past few months, have you personally talked to Waste Options Management, owner of the composter, to determine first if they believe connecting a 100-kilowatt wind turbine to the composter is the right technical solution and fits longer-term plans for the landfill, and secondly, if they support your proposal?
No, I did not talk to them. However, Waste Options and the DPW were involved in selecting 3 viable sites at the landfill over the past several years. They selected this site.
Next question, again for you, I think, Barbara, is how many bids have you received from turbine manufacturers? If none, how did you come up with the price of $620,000? And then a second question, a second aspect of the question, what happens if the costs are higher due to various reasons? For example, if the foundation for the turbine must be reinforced due to construction in a high water table? Those are really 2 separate questions for you.
Okay. You cannot submit.
Keep it as a reminder.
Okay, well, you can't solicit bids for a project that doesn't exist yet, and it wouldn't be a citizen that would do that. I did speak with the developer who put up the wind turbine at the high school. I know the cost of that, and this would actually be reduced because this developer, if they were to bid on the project, would offer a reduced rate because they've already been through, worked out all the kinks. They know how the transportation to the island works. It's been done. A lot of the unknowns were solved with that first turbine being built at the high school. So the $620,000 is the outside cost, the highest amount it would cost without those reducers. There are other reducers too.
Question for you, Matt. How does the town or the Finance Committee prioritize the spending items? I'm not sure if That's something you can answer directly.
Well, no, I'll try. Again, I think, no, that's a great question. And I'll limit that response to capital projects because that the Finance Committee takes into consideration a number of factors. One, the financials. Two, the benefit for the taxpayer, benefit for the town as a whole. And with that, it tries to prioritize. There is a specific capital programs committee which does this very thing. When it comes to renewable energy, it's a little bit different than a capital project for a road, say, or for a building, is that whereas those projects, the return on investment is benefit of the citizen, in addition, a renewable energy project, in addition to the return on investment for the citizen, is also a financial return. So that adds an extra layer. In these tough economic times for the past 4 or 5 years, the committee, Finance Committee, has looked with more scrutiny on capital projects because of other stresses for other parts of the budget, specifically the operating and the other enterprise funds. So I don't know if that's kind of an overview.
Okay. I have a comment here, but I'm going to present it as a question because I think it was intended as a question. Would a private company constructing and then selling energy not obviate town expense?
Yes, although that would be outside the scope of this article. I did speak with town council about possibly changing this article to do that, and that's not possible. That is an article that I will be bringing to the annual town meeting in the spring.
All right, and another question, why not have multiple smaller wind turbines instead of one large, possibly noisier structure?
This is a smaller, less noisy turbine. There are 3 viable sites that have been approved, and actually voters have already approved wind energy as a use for our landfill. There are 3 sites. I'd like to see 1 turbine be placed at one of the 3 sites, and then if people get used to it, maybe in the future propose another, but I don't think at this stage people would approve putting up 3 wind turbines at the landfill of any size.
Okay, the last written question, and then I'm going to take any questions from the audience live, is, and I'm not sure anybody can answer this, does the town really believe the digester will last another 10 years? And I don't know if, I think only people have beliefs, not towns, and if no one on behalf of the town wants to answer that as a people, I'll simply move on to questions from the audience. Does anybody want to address that?
I think it's
Let's just hope it lasts as long as a contract.
Okay.
I think it's a moot point.
Town has hopes, not beliefs. All right, we can open it up. We have a little more time for audience questions live. If you have any other questions, raise your hand. Randy.
Sorry, I'm asking so many questions.
No, well, thank you.
And Matt,
Yes.
as I understand it, we have historical power data from the high school, so we know what kind of power that turbine generates.
Yes.
We know the average wind speed at the high school versus the average wind speed at the landfill, and we know the electricity needs of the solid waste facility. So it sounds like you've got a lot of data. What is missing from your point of view?
I think from a Finance Committee point of view is that none of us are experts on the data, and we have received conflicting data, frankly. And when I specifically is that an energy from a wind turbine at the dump, is it worth the investment for a payoff on return? And because of that conflicting advice, the committee took a more conservative approach. That's the best way to, I think I can answer that. There was just doubters. There was just doubt for that.
Yes, sir. Just state your name.
Curtis Barnes. Over in Hyannis, there are 2 wind turbines at what I think is the sewer bed. We see it when we go over there quite often. and there are also 2 large wind turbines at Exit 8 going up to Boston. Have you had any conversation or comparison or anything with those sites that would be applicable to this site?
I haven't talked with anyone about those larger turbines because I'm not proposing a larger turbine. I'm not sure if you're talking about in Hyannis, there's 2 wind turbines at Country Gardens in Hyannis.
You can see them.
Yeah, you can see them when you come in on the ferry. Those are at Country Gardens. We have talked to Country Gardens when we were putting up the high school wind turbine. They actually lent us their test balloon that was floated for the HDC to see where the height of that wind turbine would be. And they have been very happy with their wind turbine, and that's why they put up a second one.
Follow-up question?
I think my question fundamentally is the economics and the feasibility, and I mean, being happy is good, but does it make sense financially, and is there a model that we might be looking at as a base for our discussion?
Well, I don't know what their model was. They are a business, and this is a town. You know, by putting up a wind turbine or any source of renewable energy at the landfill or wherever we have a huge municipal user, we're looking at reducing costs, not necessarily profiting, or, you know, other people might put up a wind turbine because they like to be green or feel good about their thoughts about saving the planet. Those aren't my thoughts. My thought is saving the town money, having our year-round citizens be able to continue to live here, because a $50 million or $60 million third cable will cripple a lot of families that live here year-round. Those are my thoughts.
I'll take one more question before we move on to Article 11. Anybody have another question? Yes, sir.
Chris Delano. I was just, in terms of follow-up, I'm not clear how the Finance Committee suggests that they circle the square in getting to an understanding that allows them to affirmatively proceed, or...
I'm sorry, circle,
the question of financing.
Oh, the question of financing.
Yeah, well, whether or not it is a viable capital project. You raised the question, but you didn't answer how you would actually come to a conclusion.
Is this on the wind turbine?
Yeah, you said you got conflict. Yes.
Yes. Well, there was.
You got conflicting advice.
Yes, sir.
So how do you circle that square?
Well, I think if I'm understanding your question, is that the committee voted, or the consensus for the committee, that due to different analysis that were received, the more skeptical data was what won the day. So our recommendation was based on that, and that we do not think that this is an economically feasible project for the town to proceed with right now. And I hope I'm not, am I answering your question? Because I'm not sure I get it, if not.
You seem to suggest to me
okay.
There were unanswered questions.
Yes.
You're now suggesting that you accepted the analysis of the negative.
I think that ruled the day. Yes, I think that. I don't think it was not unanimous, but yes, I think that. And again, my position here as a representative of the Finance Committee is to report to you what the consensus of the committee was on all articles. So yes, I guess the more negative data for a wind turbine won the day. Does that? I'm trying to be direct. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah,
okay.
Slightly different than what I understood you to say.
Oh, all right. Well, I apologize. I didn't mean to miscommunicate that.
We actually do have a little time for one more question if you want to ask it.
Natalie Jacobson again. Matt, do you agree with Barbara's assessment that if we don't put this turbine in, that we will need another line from the mainland that'll cost some $50 million?
This one turbine? No, ma'am. I don't think this is the make or break for determining a third line.
Can I add to that? I agree. I don't think this is the make or break either. This is one of many pieces of the puzzle, but it's a step in the right direction. And right now, our town is taking steps in the opposite direction. We're adding to our demand. We've put in electric vehicle charging stations without renewable energy sources. That's adding to our demand. We've put in this facility that we're sitting in, the police station, and many others that are adding to the demand. None of those were in the forecast of our 2023 year of needing a new cable, which is a decade away. So that cable is going to come sooner than 2023. There are just so many new things that we've done to add to that demand, and it continues. I'd like to see us reverse that trend, and this would be a start.
Okay, we're going to move on now to Article 11. Is David Barham in the room? And would you come up, sir? Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Barbara.